The land did not care. It stretched out under a pale, late autumn sky. A vast, sun-bleached sheet of prairie that rolled toward the jagged teeth of the Bighorn Mountains. The border between Montana and Wyoming was a line drawn on a map in a far-off city. But out here, it was just distance. It was just emptiness. And it was into this emptiness that Clara staggered, her feet raw and bleeding on the sharp stones. She had been running for 3 days, or maybe it was 4. Time had dissolved, boiled away by the sun and frozen by the night, leaving only the rhythm of pain. Her dress, once a pale calico, was ripped to shreds, caked with dirt and a darker, rust-colored stain that had dried on her thigh. She had left Clifton Creek with nothing but the clothes on her back and a terror so profound it had burned away her name, her past, and everything else but the need to move. Behind her, somewhere in the rolling dust, were the men. She had heard them that morning, just after the sun had climbed high enough to steal the last of the night's false warmth. 2 riders. Their voices carried on the thin, dry wind, hard and careless. Bounty hunters. They were not law, not really. They were just the hands that collected the blood money, and they would not care if they brought her back warm or cold. She had scrambled down an arroyo, sharp rocks tearing at her palms and hidden beneath a deadfall of cottonwood. She held her breath until her lungs burned, listening to the creak of their saddle leather as they passed. So close she could smell the sour sweat of their horses. They had paused, spat, and moved on, their voices fading. But they were not gone. They were just hunting. Clara pushed herself out of the brush and back into the open. The sun was a cruel, bright eye. She was barefoot. She had lost her shoes 2 days ago in a creek, the leather soft and ruined, pulling from her feet like wet paper. Now, the soles of her feet were a ruin of blisters and cuts. Each step was a fresh agony. She was dying. The knowledge was not frightening, just heavy. It was a stone in her belly. She was so thirsty her tongue felt like a piece of dry wood in her mouth. She stumbled toward a line of green, a thin promise of willow trees that meant water. The river was low, but it was moving. She fell more than walked the last 20 feet, collapsing onto the muddy bank, her hands sinking into the cold slush. She plunged her face into the water, gasping, drinking too fast, the icy shock of it making her teeth ache. She drank until her stomach cramped. Then she rolled onto her back, her breath coming in ragged, broken sobs. The sky was huge and indifferent. This is where they would find her. It was a poor place to die. She heard the snap of a twig. Clara's body went rigid. She did not scream. She had forgotten how. She only stared at the willow branches across the shallow water, waiting for the hard shape of a man with a rifle to appear. But the sound came from upstream. A horse blew out a soft breath, a sound of contentment, not pursuit. She turned her head, slowly. Her neck muscles shrieked in protest. A man was standing not 30 yards away, holding the reins of 2 big, healthy-looking horses. He was not one of the bounty hunters. He was tall, dressed in canvas and worn leather, and he was watching her with a complete, unnerving stillness. He hadn't made a sound. He just looked at her, his face shadowed by the brim of a battered hat. He was not armed, not that she could see, but his belt held a long skinning knife. Clara tried to scramble backward, to get to her feet, but her legs were useless. She was a trapped animal, and she knew the look of a trapper. The man didn't move. He just watched her, his eyes unreadable. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was low, rough, like stones rubbing together. "You look to be in a bad way, Miss—" Clara said nothing. She pressed her back against the damp earth, trying to make herself smaller. He took 1 step toward her, and she flinched, a sharp, violent jerk of her whole body. He stopped. He held up a hand, palm out. It was a large hand, calloused and stained. "I ain't gonna hurt you. My homestead is just over that rise. You'll freeze 'fore morning out here." She stared at him, her mind thick with fever and exhaustion. Another man, another cabin. The world was full of men in cabins, and none of them had been safe. "Leave me be," she rasped. The words tore at her throat. The man studied her for another long moment. He looked at her bare, bloody feet. He looked at the torn dress. His eyes seemed to take in everything, and they held no pity, just a quiet, factual assessment. "Can't do that," he said, simply. He tied the horses to a willow and walked toward her. Clara braced herself, her hands curling into fists. But there was no fight left in her. He moved with a surprising gentleness, crouching beside her, careful not to cast his shadow over her. "I'm Eli," he said. It wasn't an introduction. It was just a fact. He slid one arm under her back and the other under her knees. Clara let out a small, strangled cry as he lifted her. She weighed nothing. He carried her as easily as a sack of feed. She was rigid in his arms, her body humming with a terror so deep it was silent. She expected him to be rough, to curse at the mud on her, to make a comment about her weight or her smell. He did none of those things. He just carried her, his strides long and steady, up the bank and onto the flat prairie. His homestead was, as he'd said, just over the rise. It was less a home and more a stubborn scar on the land. A small, solid-looking cabin, built of thick, hand-hewn logs, chinked with mud and stone. It was surrounded by jagged mountains that loomed like dark blue shadows against the graying sky. The wind was picking up, and it made a low, mournful sound as it tore through the thorny brush. A lean-to was built against the side of the cabin, and a few goats huddled inside, watching their approach with yellow, alien eyes. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The cabin was one room. It was dark, and it smelled of wood smoke, cured leather, and something piney. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rifle was mounted over it. Clara's eyes fixed on the gun. Eli set her down on the single cot, which was covered with a thick buffalo hide. The moment he let her go, she scrambled backward, dragging her broken body against the log wall, her eyes wide and feral. "Don't touch me," she spat, the words full of a sudden, desperate venom. Eli just straightened up, pulling off his gloves. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "You need water, and your feet need seeing to. I don't need anything from you." She was defensive, bitter, her voice shaking. He nodded, as if she had said something reasonable. "All the same, I'm gonna light the fire. Storm's coming." He turned his back to her. Clara watched him, stunned. He turned his back. He moved to the fireplace, knelt, and began expertly stacking kindling. He was either a fool, or he did not consider her a threat at all. The thought was humiliating. He worked with a quiet efficiency. He lit the fire, and the small room filled with a flickering, orange light. Then he went to a bucket in the corner, ladled some water into a pot, and hung it on the hook over the flames. He did not look at her. He did not speak to her. He just moved. Exhaustion was a poison, and it was flooding her veins. She couldn't stay awake. Her head was heavy. She tried to fight it, to keep her eyes on this quiet, broad-shouldered man. But the warmth from the fire was pulling at her, dragging her down. Her body had made the decision for her. She couldn't run. She couldn't fight. She had to stay. She must have slept, because when she opened her eyes, the room was warmer and it was darker outside. The wind was howling now, a living thing clawing at the cabin walls. Eli was sitting on a low stool by the fire, sharpening his skinning knife with a whetstone. The shing, shing, shing of the stone was the only sound besides the wind. He saw her watching him. He put the knife and stone aside. He had a basin of water near the hearth, steam rising from it. He brought it over, along with a clean rag and a small tin. "This'll hurt," he said. He knelt in front of the cot. Clara tucked her feet under her, pulling away. "No, miss, those feet are gonna go bad if I don't clean 'em, and I ain't gonna ask you again." His voice was still quiet, but the flatness of it held an authority that chilled her. He gently took her ankle in his hand. His grip was firm, not cruel, but inescapable. She winced, but she let him. He dipped the rag in the hot water and began to clean the dirt and gravel from the soles of her feet. Clara bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. The pain was sharp, a white-hot fire. But it was his touch that was the real agony. It was not violent. It was not angry. It was just thorough. He worked in silence. When he had washed both feet, he opened the tin. It was a dark, greasy salve that smelled of pine and herbs. He coated her feet in it, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle as they moved over the raw skin. When he was done, he wrapped her feet in clean strips of cloth. "Your hands," he said. He didn't wait for her to object. He took her hands, his thumb brushing over her raw palms. Then he turned them over. His hands stilled. Clara tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, just enough. He was staring at her wrists. The rope burns were still new, angry red welts that circled her wrists. They were stark and ugly in the firelight. Eli looked at them for a long time. His face did not change. He did not ask. He just gently, carefully, applied the salve to the burns, his touch light, almost non-existent. He finished and stood up. He went to the pot over the fire, added some flour and salt, and began to stir. Clara pulled the buffalo hide around her. She was shaking. He had seen the proof, the evidence of her shame, her captivity, and he had said nothing. "There's bruises," she whispered to the wall. "On my back." Eli stopped stirring. He did not turn around. "I know. You saw. Helping you with your dress. When I brought you in. It was torn. I saw him." He still didn't turn. "You want me to look at him?" "No," she said, too quickly. "All right," he said. He went back to stirring the stew. The storm that had been threatening all day arrived in full. It was not just a storm. It was a blizzard. The wind shrieked, and the snow began to hit the one small window like handfuls of thrown sand. The world outside the cabin disappeared. They were trapped for 3 days. The snow fell. It piled up in great drifts against the door, covering the window until the cabin was in a perpetual, dim twilight, lit only by the fireplace. Clara remained on the cot, a skittish, watchful creature. She watched Eli. She watched the rifle over the fireplace. The gun was a symbol of what men did. They used guns and ropes and their fists. But Eli did none of those things. He moved with a quiet strength that unnerved her. He was a large man, and his body was hard from work, but he made himself small in the tiny space. He never crossed the invisible line he had drawn down the middle of the room. He slept on the floor near the hearth, rolled in a blanket, his back to her. A slow, silent routine developed. In the morning, he would wake before her, feed the fire, and pull on his heavy coat and boots. He would take a shovel and dig his way out the door to the lean-to, to feed his goats and the 2 horses. He would come back, his shoulders covered in snow, his face red from the cold, and he would never complain. He would just put the coffee pot on to boil. He would hand her a cup of the hot, bitter liquid. She would take it, her fingers brushing his. She would flinch. He would pretend not to notice. During the day, he mended his tack, or carved a piece of wood, or checked his traps near the door. Clara, restless and aching, finally got off the cot. Her feet were healing, the pain receding to a dull throb. She took the pot of stew. She added water. She cut the vegetables he brought in from a small, cold cellar under the floorboards. They ate their meals in silence. The sound of their spoons scraping the tin bowls was loud in the small room. The silence should have been frightening, but it was not. It was full. It was a shared space, a patch of quiet they were building together. Trust was not a thing that was given. It was a thing that grew in the dark, like a root. It was built in his not asking. It was built in her not telling. It was built in the simple, shared tasks of survival. He chopped the wood. She kept the fire. He brought the water. She made the stew. On the 3rd night, the past came for her. She was not in the cabin. She was back in Clifton Creek, in the cellar. It was dark, and she could smell the damp earth and the sour mash whiskey on his breath. He was standing over her, his shadow huge, the belt in his hand. He was laughing, and the sound was thick and wet. She was pulling, screaming, but the ropes on her wrists held fast. Clara woke up screaming. It was a raw, tearing sound that filled the cabin. She was sitting up on the cot, her hands at her throat. The buffalo hide pooled around her waist. The fire had burned down to embers, and the room was cold. Eli was on his feet in an instant. He wasn't by the fire, he was by the door, his hand on the latch, his shape a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the embers. Clara panted, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She looked at him, terrified, expecting the anger, the shout. He just stood there. He did not move toward her. He did not try to comfort her. He just watched her, his face in shadow. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't a question. "You're here." She nodded, her body still shaking. She pulled the hide up to her chin, her teeth chattering. He seemed to understand. He seemed to see the bars of the cage she was in. He saw the look in her eyes, the look of a thing that expects the cage door to slam shut. He let his hand fall from the latch. He pulled on his boots, which he'd left by the door. He grabbed his heavy coat from its peg. What are you doing?" she whispered. Eli finished buttoning the coat. He wrapped a scarf around his neck. "Just gonna sit on the porch for a spell," he said, his voice low. "It's the storm. It's letting up some." He opened the door. A blast of frigid air and fine, powdery snow filled the room, making the embers in the fireplace hiss and glow. He stepped out onto the small, snow-covered porch. He did not close the door all the way. He left it open, just a crack. Clara sat in the darkness, listening to the wind. She stared at the sliver of gray morning light in the doorframe. He was out there, in the freezing cold. He hadn't trapped her. He hadn't locked her in. He had sat outside so she wouldn't feel caged inside. She wrapped the hide tighter around her and, for the first time in a very long time, she cried. They were not hot, angry tears. They were cold, silent ones that slipped down her cheeks and froze on her jaw. The storm broke the next day. The world was white and silent, the sun a pale, watery disk in the sky. Eli took his rifle. Clara tensed, but he just nodded toward the door, checking the perimeter for wolves, and left for most of the day. Clara was alone. She could have run. She could have taken food and tried to walk out. Her feet were better, but where would she go? Back to the bounty hunters? Back to Clifton Creek? She stayed. She fed the fire. She made soup. When Eli returned, he had 2 rabbits. He didn't say a word, just set about skinning them with an efficiency that was both brutal and clean. She began to notice things. She noticed the way he spoke to his horses when he thought she wasn't listening, his voice low and soft. A murmur she couldn't catch, but a tone she understood. She saw him find a small bird with a broken wing in the lean-to, and she watched him from the window as he gently set the wing, taped it with a bit of leather and string, and put the bird in a small box with some feed. His gentleness with animals was a strange and painful thing to watch. He spoke with a steadiness that was as solid as the mountains around them. He never raised his voice. He never hurried. He was a quiet, constant presence, and she found herself aching with a longing she did not understand. It was a physical ache, a hollowness in her chest. She wanted to be touched. The thought was a betrayal. It was the one thing that had cost her everything. But after days of his careful, respectful distance, the lack of human contact was its own kind of torture. She felt like a ghost. That night, the silence in the cabin felt different. It was not peaceful. It was charged, heavy with unspoken things. Eli was sitting by the fire, mending a piece of harness. His head bent, the firelight catching the lines on his face. He was not a handsome man, not in the way the men in town were. His face was too harsh, his nose broken, a small scar cutting through one eyebrow. But he was real. Clara stood up from the cot. He didn't look up. Need something? No. She walked the few feet that separated them. She stood before him, her shadow falling over his work. He slowly, very slowly, looked up at her. His eyes were dark, the pupils wide in the low light. She was weak. She knew she was. She was weak from hunger, from fear, from the desperate, aching need not to be alone anymore. In a moment of pure, unadulterated weakness, she leaned down. She put her hand on his shoulder. her fingers digging into the rough wool of his shirt. She leaned in to kiss him. He didn't pull away. He didn't push her. He just stopped her. His hands came up, not to her waist, not to her face, but to her shoulders. He caught her, his grip firm, holding her an inch from his face. She could feel his breath, warm and smelling of coffee. He held her there, steadying her, and looked right into her eyes. She saw a deep, profound sadness in his gaze. "You don't need to offer yourself to stay alive," he said. His voice so quiet she barely heard it over the crackle of the fire. The words were a slap, a cold, hard dose of truth that shattered her. She pulled back as if burned, her hands flying to her chest, shame washing over her in a hot, sickening wave. He was right. That's what she was doing. It was all she knew how to do. She backed away, tears blurring her vision, her throat closing up. "Clara," he said. He had never used her name before. She turned, her back to him, unable to let him see her face. The silence stretched. She was an open wound. He had seen the very worst, most broken part of her. She whispered, her voice a dry, broken thing, a confession to the cold logs of the cabin wall. "But I don't feel alive unless someone touches me." The words hung in the small, warm space. A confession so bare it seemed to suck the air from the room. Clara's back was rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. She was waiting for the blow, or the disgust, or the pity, which was worse than both. Eli did not move from his stool. The fire crackled, spitting a small ember onto the hearthstone. He watched it burn out. He took a long, slow breath, and the silence stretched until Clara thought her skin would tear from the tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rougher than she had ever heard it. "Feeling alive," he said. "Ain't the same as being used. Clara." He stood up, slowly. He didn't move toward her, but to the wood pile, where he picked a fresh log and settled it onto the coals. He poked the fire, his movements deliberate, controlled. "What you said about touch, that ain't what you were looking for. You were looking for a way to pay your keep. That's what you know." He straightened, wiping his dusty hands on his trousers. And finally, he looked at her. "You ain't got to pay for your life here." The shame that had been a hot wave was now a cold, leaden weight. He had seen all the way through her, to the rotten, hollow place inside. "You don't know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You don't know what I am, what I did to get here." "I know you were running," he said, his voice flat. "I know you were hurt. That's all I needed to know." "I fled Clifton Creek," she said, the words spilling out, desperate to make him understand, to make him see her as the monster she was, so he would stop looking at her with that terrible, quiet kindness. "I ran from that town, and I left a man dead." There it was, the word dead. She watched him, her heart hammering. She expected him to move for the rifle, to back away, to call her a liar, or a whore, or a murderer. Eli just nodded, as if she had told him the stew was salty. He turned and picked up the harness he had been mending. He sat back down. "He have a name?" Eli asked, his fingers finding the split leather. Clara was stunned. "What? The man, did he have a name?" I don't. Yes, but I won't say more. I can't." "All right," Eli said. He tested the stitch he was making. The simple acceptance was a new kind of agony. She wanted to scream. Why was he not afraid? Why was he not angry? "That's it?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I tell you that a man is dead because of me. And you say, all right?" Eli stopped his work. He looked at the leather in his hands, then at the fire, and then, at last, back at her. His eyes were dark, and for the first time, she saw the shadow of a guilt that matched her own. "I ain't a priest. Clara, I ain't here to give you forgiveness, 'cause I ain't got none to give." He set the harness down, his big hands resting on his knees. "I worked a ranch, about 8 years back, down in Colorado territory. The man who owned it, Silas Croft, he was a hard man, thought he was the law. He'd hunt outlaws, not for the bounty, just for the sport of it. He stared into the flames, his voice becoming distant, as if he were pulling the words from a deep, cold well. He'd say it was justice, but he liked it. He liked watching the fear. I told myself it wasn't my business. I was just a ranch hand. I tended his horses, and I kept my mouth shut. I watched him string up 3 men. They were bad men, I suppose. Rustlers. He paused and swallowed. But one day, a kid, he wasn't more than 17, stole a saddle, just a saddle. Silas and his boys caught him at the riverbed. They were going to whip him. But Silas, he was drunk. He said the kid was worthless. A bad seed. Clara watched him, her own fear forgotten, replaced by a cold dread. They had a rope, Eli said, his voice barely a whisper. And I didn't stop him. I didn't say a word. His hands clenched into fists. Worse, I joined in. I held the boy's arms, while Silas, he said he was just teaching him a lesson. But the boy fought, and Silas, he didn't stop. He looked at his hands. So, you see, you left a dead man behind you. Well, so did I. He looked up at her, and his face was a mask of old, worn-out pain. We all got blood on us, one way or another. Difference is, some of us admit it. They didn't sleep that night. They sat by the fire, the wall between them gone, replaced by the wreckage of their shared confessions. They talked, not about the details, not about the blood or the fear. They talked about the after. Clara spoke of the way shame felt, how it was a cold thing that lived under your skin, that made you flinch from a kind word, how it made you believe you deserved the hard ground and the cold wind. How desire, the simple human need to be held, got twisted into something ugly, something you had to trade, something that could be taken. Eli spoke of the silence, how he had left that ranch and never looked back, how he had moved from town to town, but he couldn't get the sound of that rope out of his head. He talked about how guilt eats at a man's soul, how it sours his food, how it makes him seek out the empty places, because he feels he don't deserve to be around decent folk. They talked until the fire was embers and the first pale gray light of dawn touched the snow-covered window. For the first time, Clara looked at this man, Eli, and saw not a rescuer, not a captor, but an equal. They were 2 broken halves of the same ruined thing. The next morning, the confession changed the air of the cabin. The tension was gone, but so was the careful distance. Clara woke to find him already gone, checking the snares. She got up, not from the cot, but from the floor by the fire, where she had eventually fallen asleep, wrapped in her own blanket. She felt a new, strange energy. It was not peace, it was purpose. When he returned, she was outside. She had found his axe by the woodpile. She was swinging it, badly, her blows glancing off the side of a thick log, her arms shaking from the effort. Eli stopped, a brace of rabbits in his hand. He watched her for a moment. "You'll lose a foot that way," he said, not unkindly. Clara's face flushed. She stopped, breathing hard. "Well, I can't just sit. I can't be a burden." "You ain't a burden." "I don't want to be," she said, fiercely. "Show me." He dropped the rabbits and came over. He didn't take the axe from her. He just put his hands on her arms, repositioning her. "Your stance," he said, his voice near her ear. She smelled wood smoke and leather. "Feet wider, and don't fight the axe. Let the weight do the work." He stepped back. "Try." She swung. The axe bit into the wood. A satisfying thunk. She worked it free and swung again, and again. By the time she had split the log, sweat was running down her back. Her hands were raw, and she felt more alive than she had in years. She started to help. It was a new, unspoken arrangement. She was not his guest. She was not his prisoner. She was there. She learned to feed the goats, their strange, cold eyes watching her, their soft muzzles tickling her palm. She learned to bank the fire, to clean the rabbits he brought home, her stomach turning at first, but her hands steadying. She discovered a peace in labor. When your hands were busy, your mind didn't have as much room for the ghosts. The land was hard. The cabin was a tiny, warm fist clenched against the vast, cold indifference of the mountains. The wind howled, a constant, mournful sound. At night, they heard the coyotes, their yips and cries a hungry chorus that made her skin crawl. The supplies were low. The flour was half gone, the coffee grounds used twice over, but inside the cabin, a new warmth grew. It was in the stew she kept hot for him. It was in the silence, which was no longer empty, but comfortable. It was in the way he would hand her the knife to cut the bread. A simple, unspoken trust. The yearning she had felt before, the one that had led to her night of shame. It returned, but it was different. It was not a hollow, desperate ache. It was a slow-building heat. It was in the way she watched his hands, so large and rough, as he mended a tear in her dress. It was in the way he watched her as she brushed her hair by the fire, his eyes lingering, not with hunger, but with something else, something that felt like appreciation. After days of this quiet, simmering tension, it finally broke. It was evening. The work was done. The animals were fed. They had eaten their meal of thin rabbit stew. Eli was cleaning his rifle, the lamplight gleaming on the oiled steel. Clara was patching one of his shirts, her stitches small and neat. She finished her work. She folded the shirt and put it on the small shelf. He looked up, his hands stilling on the rifle. "You're good at that." My mother taught me," she said, the memory a small, sharp pain. She stood in the middle of the small room. He was on his stool. She was on the cot. The fire was between them. She walked to him. He watched her approach. He did not look away. He did not move. He just watched. She stopped in front of him, so close her skirt brushed his knees. She was trembling. This was not the desperate, broken thing she had been. This was a choice. It was the first real choice she had made in as long as she could remember. She was terrified. "Clara," he said, his voice a low warning. Not for her, but for himself. "Eli?" she whispered. She did not lunge. She did not offer. She just leaned in. Slowly, she put her hands on his shoulders, feeling the hard muscle beneath the wool. This time, he did not stop her. She pressed her lips to his. It was not a desperate kiss. It was tender. It was trembling. It was a question, a plea, and an answer all in one. His lips were chapped, and he tasted of coffee and the faint, metallic tang of the gun oil. For a moment, he remained perfectly still. Then, he let out a breath, a sound that seemed to part with years of loneliness. His hands, his large, careful hands, came up and held her, not her shoulders, not her waist. He held her head, his palms cupping her face, his thumbs at her temples, as if she were the most fragile, precious thing in the world, as if she were made of glass. He allowed it. He kissed her back. The kiss was slow. It was emotional. It was a discovery. He tilted his head, deepening it, and Clara felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a warmth that started in her belly and spread to her limbs, a feeling of safety. He broke the kiss, but he didn't let her go. He just rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Clara," he breathed. He lifted her then, as easily as he had the first day by the river. He stood, his arms under her, and carried her the few steps to the cot. He laid her down on the buffalo hide. He did not rush. He undressed her slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, the firelight playing over them. He unwrapped her like a gift, his rough fingers gentle on the buttons of her dress, on the ties of her chemise. He looked at the healed burns on her wrists, and he kissed them. He looked at the faint, yellowing bruises on her back, and he traced them with a finger, his touch a promise. He undressed himself, and she saw him, the scars on his body, a long, puckered one on his side, a round one on his shoulder. He was a map of his own hard life. He lay down beside her, pulling the hide over them. They made love by firelight. It was slow, it was quiet, it was an exploration. It was two ruined, lonely people finding a place to rest. It was the touch she had craved, but it was not a trade. It was a sharing. When it was over, they lay tangled together, the fire burning low, and they wept, both of them. Not from sadness, not from pain. They wept because, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they felt safe. Clara lay curled against his chest, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm under her ear. The old fears, the old shame, began to creep back in. This was too good. It was too kind. It couldn't be real. She whispered into the warmth of his skin, her voice thick. "Do you still want me after this?" She felt him pull her closer. He kissed the top of her head. He was silent for a long time, and she thought he hadn't heard, or wouldn't answer. Then he whispered back, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "Clara, I've never wanted anything more than the part of you you think is ruined." The next morning, the world felt new. The light in the cabin was different. Clara woke up in his arms, in the cot, and the feeling of his body, warm and solid behind hers, was an anchor. But the world outside had not changed. "I gotta go to town," he said over coffee. He was dressed for riding. "These furs won't trade themselves. We're low on flour and salt." Clara's stomach tightened. "Town?" "Not Clifton Creek," he said immediately, seeing the fear in her eyes. "There's a trading post a few miles south. Man named Henderson runs it. He's fair, and he don't ask questions." He kissed her. It was a new thing, a simple morning kiss. "I'll be back for sundown. You keep the door barred. Don't go out less you have to." She watched him ride out, his figure shrinking against the vast, white landscape, until he was just a dot, and then he was gone. The cabin felt huge without him, and terrifyingly empty. She did her chores. She fed the goats. She chopped a little wood, the swing of the axe feeling good, strong. The day was bright, the sun sharp on the snow. She felt almost happy. She was in the lean-to, brushing one of the horses, when she heard it, a horse, not Eli's. This one was coming from the valley, not the south. Her blood went cold. She didn't run. She didn't panic. She just moved. She slipped out of the lean-to, staying low, and scrambled up the small, rocky hill behind the cabin. She found a thicket of pine, the branches heavy with snow, and settled in, her heart in her throat. A man rode into the clearing. He was not a bounty hunter. He was worse. He was clean, his coat new, a badge pinned to his chest. He was law. He sat on his horse, his eyes scanning everything. The tracks, the faint wisp of smoke from the chimney, the axe in the wood pile. He was Deputy Harlan. She knew his name. She had seen him, once, in Clifton Creek, talking to the judge. He dismounted, his movements crisp, and knocked on the cabin door. "Hello, the cabin," he called. His voice was strong, confident. Clara held her breath. He knocked again, harder. "I know someone's here." Saw the smoke. He tried the door. It was barred, just as Eli had told her. He cursed, softly. He walked around the cabin. He looked in the lean-to. "Damn," he muttered. He was about to leave, when another rider appeared. A trapper, his clothes a mess of furs. "Howdy, Deputy," the trapper said, surprised to see Law this far up. "You live up here?" Harlan asked, his hand on his pistol. "Passing through. This is Eli's place, but he ain't home. You know him?" "Know of him," the trapper said, spitting. "Keeps to himself. A lot." Harlan looked at the tracks. "He ride out this morning?" "Looks like," the trapper said. Harlan pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "I'm hunting someone. A woman. Fled from Clifton Creek. Name's Clara. Seen her? Dark hair. Medium height. Might look used up." The trapper's eyes narrowed. "What's it to you?" Harlan smiled. A cold, thin-lipped expression. "It's $50 to me. And to whoever helps me find her. Price on her head. For the murder of Judge Elias Thorne." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling her gasp. $50. Murder? The trapper shook his head. "Ain't seen no woman. and I don't want no part of it. Suit yourself, Harlan said. He looked around the homestead one last time, his eyes cold and assessing. But if you do, that's $50, dead or alive. He mounted his horse. You tell this Eli, a deputy was asking. You see him. Won't see him, the trapper said. Harlan rode off, back toward the valley. The trapper went the other way. Clara stayed in the frozen pines until her feet were numb. $50. A price on her head. And a name. Judge Elias Thorne. She had left a dead man, but she had never told Eli that the dead man was a judge. Clara was numb. She had built the fire, barred the door, and now she sat on the stool, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She watched the sliver of sunlight move across the floorboards. Every snap of a frozen branch, every gust of wind, made her jump. He was back, Harlan, and he knew her name. He knew the judge's name, $50. She had been a secret, a ghost. Now she was a price. It was late afternoon when she heard his horse. She knew the sound of his gray gelding, the steady, ground-eating gait. Relief was a sharp, painful thing, lodging in her throat, because it came with the terror of what she had to tell him. The bar scraped. The door opened. Eli stepped in, kicking snow from his boots. "Got it," he said, dropping a heavy burlap sack on the table. The smell of fresh flour and coffee filled the room. Henderson was in a good mood, even threw in some molasses. He turned, a small, rare smile on his face, and it died when he saw her. She hadn't moved. She was a statue of pale fear. "Clara!" His hand went to the knife on his belt. "What is it? What happened?" A man was here," she whispered. The words felt like broken glass. His face went hard. "Who?" "A deputy, from Clifton Creek. His name was Harlan." Eli was still, but his eyes were alive, scanning the cabin, the window, as if expecting the man to be there. What did he want? He was asking neighbors. "A trapper came by while he was here. He was asking for me." "He knows you're here." "No, I hid in the woods. I heard them. Eli, he said there's a bounty." Eli swore, a low, vicious sound. "How much?" $50. Eli was quiet, processing. $50. That'll bring every half-broke drifter in the territory sniffing around. We gotta move." "It's not just that," she said, her voice breaking. The man I left, I didn't tell you the truth. Eli, not all of it." He looked at her, his face unreadable. He waited. "He wasn't just a man," she said, the shame rising, hot and acidic. He was my employer. His name was Judge Elias Thorne." The name landed in the room with a dead, heavy sound. A judge, not a rancher, not a drunk in a saloon, a man of law, a man of power. Eli's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. "He didn't employ me?" she continued, the words tumbling out, desperate to make him see the whole, ugly truth. He bought me, my father. He died. He owed money. The bank took the farm. They sold me at a debtor's auction to cover the note. I was property." She was looking at the floor, at her hands, at anything but his face. Everyone in town thought he was a good man. "A fine man. He took me in, they said, gave me a roof, but he kept me in the basement, on the old foundation, where no one could hear." She finally looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The rope burns. Eli, they weren't from running. They were from him. He chained me to a post when he was in the mood." Eli's stillness was terrifying. He wasn't breathing. "How did you get away?" His voice was flat, a piece of cold iron. "There was a storm," she whispered, the memory making her shake. "A thunderstorm. It was loud, so loud the whole house was shaking. He came down. He was drunk. He took off his belt." She stopped, choking on the words. He set the belt on the table, and he turned to light another lamp. And I grabbed it. She was crying now, but her voice was dead, reciting a fact. I pulled. I put it around his neck, and I pulled. I just held on. He was so surprised. He fought. He scratched my arms. But I was screaming, and the thunder. No one could hear. I just held on until he stopped. The cabin was silent. The only sound was the low hiss of the fire. I took the key from his pocket. I undid the chain, and I ran. I just ran. I didn't look back. I ran until my feet were raw. I ran until you found me. She had nothing left. She was empty. She waited for him to move, to back away, to tell her to get out. Eli stared at the wall over her head for a long, terrible minute. He seemed to be counting the knots in the wood. Then, slowly, he turned his gaze to her. His eyes were not full of disgust. They were not full of pity. They were cold. They were full of a deep, ancient anger that had nothing to do with her. Then he earned what he got, he said. The words were not the comfort she craved. They were a judgment. It doesn't matter what he earned, she cried, the sob finally breaking from her. She slid from the stool, collapsing to her knees on the rough floorboards. Don't you understand? It doesn't matter. I still did it. I strangled him. Eli, I felt him die. I'm like him. I'm a murderer. He knelt in front of her. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just looked at her, his face grim. No, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. You ain't. He did it 'cause he liked the power, 'cause he was rotten. You did it to survive. That ain't the same thing. But the law won't care. No, he said, it won't. He stood up, and he was no longer the quiet homesteader. He was someone else, someone harder, which means we can't just run. We gotta be ready to fight. He took the rifle from the mantel. You can't just hide, he told her the next morning. The sun was bright on the snow, but the air in the cabin was heavy. Not anymore. Hiding means you're just waiting to be found. I can't, she said, looking at the heavy weapon. Yes, you can. He pushed it into her hands. It was heavy, smelling of oil and steel. You said you won't be chained again. This is the only thing that'll stop it. He took her outside, into the blinding white. He set a row of pine cones on the split-rail fence. Hold it tight to your shoulder, he said, his voice all business. His hand rested on her back, guiding her. Or it'll kick you something fierce. Breathe out, all the way, and don't pull the trigger. Squeeze it, slow, like you're squeezing water from a rag. She was terrified of the noise, of the power. She closed her eyes and pulled. The explosion was deafening. The rifle stock slammed into her shoulder. A brutal, shocking pain, and she stumbled backward, dropping the gun into the snow. The pine cone was untouched. Again, he said. He didn't coddle her. He didn't praise her. He just trained her. For days. They worked. The sound of gunfire echoed in their small valley. She learned to load. She learned to clean the weapon. She learned to respect the kick, to lean into it. After a week, she hit the pine cone, and the next one, he taught her to ride. Not just to sit a horse, but to ride. You're riding like a sack of flour, he told her, his patience wearing thin. You gotta be part of him. Feel him. You move. He moves. He got on his own horse and made her follow. They rode into the high country, through tight passes, over frozen streams. He showed her how to use the terrain, how to look for cover. Don't ever ride on the ridge, he said, pointing. You're a target for anyone in the valley. Stay in the shadow of the rocks. The training was hard, and it was intimate. His hands were constantly on her, correcting her grip on the rifle, steadying her on the horse, his body pressed against her back. It was a new kind of touch. It was not gentle, not comforting. It was practical. It was for survival. And it bound them tighter than any soft word ever could. The nights changed. They still slept in the single cot, but it was no longer just for warmth. It was for comfort. The fear of Harlan, of the $50 bounty, was a living thing that sat in the corner of the cabin. In the dark, they fought it back. They would lie awake for hours, her back pressed against his chest, his arm a heavy, possessive bar across her waist. She no longer had the nightmares. She didn't have time for the ghosts of the past. The ghosts of the future were too close. "You're not afraid of me?" she whispered one night, into the darkness. "Knowing what I can do." She felt his chest rise and fall in a slow breath. "I'm not afraid of you, Clara. I'm afraid for you, but I ain't afraid of what you did to that man. He had it coming." A long silence settled between them, filled only by the wind. "That deputy," Eli said, his voice a low rumble against her back. "Harlan, he's law, and law's a stubborn, stupid animal. It don't care about right. It only cares about rules." "You hate them," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I hate what they make you do," he said. He shifted, pulling her closer. "I told you about the kid, the one Silas Croft hung, but that ain't the only reason I'm here, hiding like you." She turned in his arms to face him. In the faint moonlight from the window, she could just make out the hard lines of his face. "What do you mean?" "I'm wanted, too, not like you. Not for blood. For leaving," he told her, about the war, about joining a state militia afterward. Just for the pay. They were supposed to be keeping the peace. "But keeping the peace," he said, his voice flat and bitter, "just meant clearing land, pushing folks off. We came on an encampment, Shoshone. Wasn't a war party. It was families, old women, kids. They were just trying to get by." He stopped, and she felt him swallow. "The captain," he gave the order. "Clear 'em out. Said they were hostiles. They weren't hostiles. They were just hungry. He wanted us to fire. Into the teepees. Just fire." His voice went so quiet, she had to strain to hear him. "I'd seen enough. I'd done enough. I couldn't." "I turned my horse. The captain called me a traitor, a deserter. He said he'd see me hang. I just rode. They shot at me, but I didn't shoot back. I just ran." He turned his head, his eyes finding hers in the dark. "Been running ever since. If that captain ever saw my face, he'd hang me from the nearest tree." He managed a small, broken half-smile. "You're not the only outlaw here. Clara?" She reached out, and her hand found his. It was calloused and strong. She laced her fingers through his. They lay there for a long time, two fugitives, holding on in the dark. The next morning, the world had changed again. They were not a man and a woman. They were a we. They were a pair. "We can't stay," Eli said. He was staring out the window. The snow was pulling back from the ground, revealing the wet, brown earth. The thaw was here. "Spring," he said. "It's going to make the passes open. It's going to make travel easier, for us, and for Harlan." "Where do we go?" she asked. The thought of leaving this cabin, the first safe place she had ever known, was a new kind of terror. "West," he said, his voice certain. "All the way. I heard Oregon. It's green. You can get lost there. No one knows us. No judges. No militias. We can find a place. Oregon." The word was a promise, a new life. "All right," she said, a small, fragile seed of hope beginning to grow. "West." They began to make plans, real plans. They would have to sell the goats. They needed ammunition, dried beef, more salt. They packed what little they had. It was a strange, hopeful time. They worked together, a quiet, efficient team. Clara even laughed, a real, full laugh, when Eli dropped a tin of beans. The hope lasted for 2 days. Eli had gone out to check his snares, to see what the thaw had uncovered. He was gone longer than usual. Clara was packing dried herbs into small cloth bags when the cabin door burst open, making her gasp and drop the bag. Eli stood in the doorway, his rifle in his hand. His face was granite. "What is it?" she whispered. "Get your things," he said, his voice low. "Urgent. The ones you can carry, now." "Eli, what's wrong? You're scaring me." "The thaw," he said, his eyes scanning the tree line outside. It uncovered 'em. Tracks, down in the gulch. About a mile east. 3 riders. They ain't fresh. They've been there. A day, maybe two, camped, waitin'. Harlan, she breathed, the hope in her chest turning to ice. And two others, he said. They're watching us. Clara, they're just watching. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. We have to run, now. We can take the horses. We can go north into the high country, like you taught me. We can lose them in the rocks. She was grabbing the saddlebags, her hands shaking, stuffing food into them. No, she froze. What? They're camped, he said, his voice hard. They're trackers. They're not fools. They know we're here. We run, they hunt, and they'll run us down before we make 10 miles. They're fresh. We're not. So what do we do? She cried. We just wait for them to come here? I'm gonna go to them, he said. He was checking the load in his rifle. No! The word was a scream, torn from her. No, Eli, you can't. There's 3 of them. They'll kill you. I can talk to them, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe the money. I got the fur money, $50. Maybe they'll take that and go. They won't, she shrieked, grabbing his arm. He's law. Eli, he wants me. You'll go down there and they'll kill you. They'll kill you, and then they'll take me. And I won't go back. I won't be chained again. We can't run, he said, his voice a low growl. He grabbed her arms, his fingers digging in. We run now. We run forever. Look at me. He forced her to meet his eyes. Will you keep running for the rest of your life? The question hit her, a physical blow. Running. It was all she had ever done. The fear, the terror of losing him, the absolute bone-deep horror of being caught. It all boiled over. She slapped him, a hard, sharp crack that echoed in the tiny, silent cabin. His head snapped to the side. The red mark of her hand flared on his cheek in the pale light. The silence was shocking. Clara's face crumpled. The anger, the fear, it all broke. She fell against him, her fists beating weakly on his hard chest. Don't go, she sobbed, her voice muffled against his shirt. Please, Eli, don't leave me. Please, don't let them take me. She looked up at him, her face a ruin of tears and terror. You still want me? After what I did? After this? She was a mess, a murderer, a violent, scared animal. How could he want this? Eli said nothing. His expression was dark, unreadable. The anger from the slap, the fear of the men outside, the desperation in her voice. It all coalesced into something fierce. He didn't speak. He just kissed her. It was not the tender, healing kiss from weeks before. It was hard. It was urgent. It was full of all the fear and anger they could not say. He backed her into the cabin wall, his hand grabbing the back of her head, tangling in her hair, his mouth rough and demanding. It was not gentle. It was desperate. It was a kiss that said, I am here. You are mine. We are alive. He lifted her, his hands under her thighs, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her back pressed against the rough, cold logs. He didn't carry her to the bed. He took her right there, against the wall. It was rough. It was fast. It was a drowning man's last breath. It was full of fear and craving. It was the sound of tearing cloth, the gasp of their breath, the scrape of his stubble on her neck as he kissed her throat. It was a desperate, frantic affirmation of life in the immediate shadow of death. When it was over, they were both shaking, slick with sweat, clinging to each other as if the floor had fallen away, the sound of their ragged breathing filling the room. They lay tangled in the cot, the dim gray light of pre-dawn just beginning to creep through the cabin's single window. The air was cold. Eli was asleep. Finally, his breathing deep and even, his face in repose, looking younger, less hard. He was exhausted, drained by the fear and the desperate, frantic coupling that had been more an affirmation of life than an act of love. Clara was awake. She had not slept. She stared at the rough log ceiling, her body aching, a new, cold resolve settling in her stomach. What they had done, clinging to each other against the wall, had not been a solution. It was a goodbye. He was going to fight for her. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. He would go down to that camp, and Harlan, a man of the law, would see a deserter with a rifle, protecting a wanted murderer. They would kill him. There would be no talk, no $50. They would shoot him where he stood. And if, by some miracle, he survived, he would be a wanted man for killing a deputy. He would be hunted, just as she was. She had brought this to him. She had taken his quiet, lonely life, and she had set it on fire. There was only one way. It was her debt, not his. She slid from the bed, her movements slow, silent, a ghost in the dim room. She did not shiver as her bare feet touched the cold floorboards. She dressed quickly, pulling on the rough woolen trousers and shirt he had given her. She found a scrap of paper, the corner of a page from an old almanac, with a nub of charcoal from the hearth. She wrote, "I am sorry. This is my debt to pay. Don't follow." She left the note on the table, where he would see it. She took the small bay mare he had taught her to ride. She took a blanket, a small sack of dried beef, and her rifle. She looked back at the cabin, a small, solid shape in the gray light. It was the only home she had ever known. She had been safe there. She mounted the horse. She did not ride west, toward Oregon. She rode east, toward the rising sun, toward Copper Ridge. She rode with a purpose. She would not hide her tracks. She would make them plain. She would draw them away from him. A clear, desperate trail for them to follow. Eli woke to the cold. The fire was low, but it was the empty space beside him that woke him fully. "Clara!" The cabin was silent. He sat up, his heart a cold knot in his chest. He saw it, the note on the table. He read the 3 short sentences. A guttural sound, half groan, half curse, tore from his chest. "Damn her," he whispered. "Damn her stubborn. Foolish." He was on his feet, pulling on his boots, his mind racing. She was gone. Her horse. Her rifle. He ran outside. The air was sharp, and the ground was a half-frozen mud. And there, clear as a scar, were the tracks of the bay mare, heading east. "Fool!" he snarled. But the anger was a thin, brittle sheet over the terror beneath. She was drawing them off. She was sacrificing herself. She was riding to them. She thought she was saving him. She didn't understand. She didn't understand that she was his life, that without her, this cabin, this land, this breathing, it was all just an empty chore. He had understood her, though he understood why she ran. It was love. It was the same desperate, protective love that had made him want to walk into that camp. It was the love of a person who believes they are already ruined, and so has nothing left to lose but the one good thing they have found. He did not waste time. He moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency. He packed his saddlebags, not with food, with ammunition, with the long skinning knife, with the strips of clean cloth they had set aside for bandages, and the tin of salve. He took his rifle, his pistol, and every cartridge he owned. He mounted his gray gelding. He looked at her tracks, at the way they pointed, clear and deliberate, toward Copper Ridge. "You're not paying this debt alone," he said to the empty air. And he rode, not following her tracks, but cutting north, taking the high game trails he knew. A faster, harder path that would let him see the canyon before she ever reached it. Clara rode for hours. The sun rose, a weak, watery thing that offered no warmth. The land was open, the wind relentless. She was cold, but her mind was clear. She had a plan. When they found her, she would not resist. She would drop the rifle. She would tell them she had fled the cabin, that she had stolen the horse and the gun. The man there, Eli, he was just a trapper who had taken pity on her. He knew nothing. She had left him in the night. She would make them believe it. She would protect him. She reached the mouth of Copper Ridge Canyon as the sun was at its peak. The canyon was a great, red rock gash in the earth, its walls steep and shadowed. It was a natural trap. She rode in, her horse's hooves echoing on the stone. She didn't have to wait long. They came from the rocks above her, not from the trail. 3 riders, Harlan, his badge winking in the sun, and 2 other men, their faces hard and bearded, Well, well, Harlan called down, his voice slick with triumph. Look what the wind blew in, the $50 girl. They rode down, surrounding her. Clara pulled the mare to a halt, her heart hammering. Get down, Harlan ordered. She did as he said, her hands raised. I surrender. I won't fight. One of the men grabbed the rifle from her saddle. Harlan dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. He walked up to her, his eyes cold and assessing. He was shorter than Eli, but he carried an air of absolute, smug authority. Where's the man from the cabin? He asked, his voice low. He's gone. Clara lied, her voice shaking just enough. He's a trapper. He left 2 days ago. I stole his horse. Harlan slapped her. It was not a strike of passion. It was a cold, calculated blow that snapped her head to the side and sent her staggering. She tasted blood. You're a liar, he said, his voice bored. And a thief, and a murderer. You killed a judge. I don't care what he did, Harlan spat. You're filth, and you're gonna hang. He nodded to his men. Make camp. We'll take her back in the morning. They did not treat her like a prisoner. They treated her like an animal. They built a fire in the shelter of an overhang as the sun began to set and the temperature plummeted. The canyon walls funneled the wind, turning it into a high, shrieking moan. The men ate, their shapes dark against the fire. Passing a bottle. Harlan did not put her by the fire. He took her to a stunted pine tree at the edge of the camp, 30 feet from the life-giving warmth. He tied her to it. He pulled her arms high around the trunk, forcing her to stand, the rough bark digging into her face. He bound her wrists with a rope that cut into her healing burns, and then tied her ankles. She was spread-eagled, helpless, exposed to the full, brutal force of the wind. Maybe a night out here will... Clear your head, Harlan mocked. He stood in front of her, so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. Maybe you'll remember where your trapper friend went. I told you, I don't... You're filth, Clara, he whispered, his face close to hers. You killed a man of God, a man of the law. And for that, you're gonna swing. But first, you're gonna be cold. He walked away, back to the fire. The night began. It was an eternity of agony. The cold was a living thing. It seeped through her thin shirt and trousers, into her skin, into her bones. She began to shake, a violent, uncontrollable shivering that rattled her teeth and made the ropes burn. The men ignored her. They drank. One of them, the younger one, looked over at her, his face uneasy. Harlan, she'll freeze. She's tougher than she looks, Harlan said, not looking up from the fire. Besides, we just need her warm enough to hang. Clara's mind began to go numb. The cold was merciful in that way. It was quiet. She thought of Eli. She thought of the warmth of the cabin. She thought of his hand, so rough, cupping her face. She had done it. He was safe. He was miles away. He was safe. She held that one thought in her mind, a single, glowing ember against the vast, killing cold. She drifted. She didn't know how much time had passed. It was dark. The fire was lower. The two men were in their bedrolls. Harlan was on watch, sitting on a log, his back to her, staring into the coals, his rifle across his lap. And then she saw a shadow move. It was not a man. It was just a piece of the darker night, detaching itself from the rocks. Eli. He moved with a silence that was absolute. He was a phantom. He had come from the rocks behind Harlan. He was stalking him. Clara's heart stopped. She wanted to scream, to warn him, but her throat was frozen. Harlan stirred, as if sensing something. He turned his head, looking left, then right. He saw nothing. He settled back down. Eli moved. It was not a rush. It was a single, fluid motion. He covered the last 10 feet in 2 steps. His left hand clamped over Harlan's mouth, cutting off his shout. His right hand, holding the long skinning knife, drew a single, deep, horizontal line across Harlan's throat. It was brutal. It was silent. It was done. Eli held the deputy for a moment as the life gushed out of him, then laid him gently on the ground, as if putting a child to bed. He turned, his face a mask of cold fury in the dim firelight, and came for her. He didn't speak. He just cut the ropes, his knife biting through them in sharp, angry strokes. Her arms fell, dead and numb, and she collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. He held her, his arms like steel bands, rubbing her back, her arms, forcing the life back into her. "She's not alone anymore," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing, his lips against her hair. A shout. "Harlan, what the— Hey!" The younger man was scrambling from his bedroll, his pistol in his hand. Eli shoved Clara behind him. "Get to the horses, now!" He raised his rifle. The world exploded. The younger man fired. His shot wild, high. Eli's shot was not— It took the man in the chest, slamming him back against the canyon wall. The third man was firing from his bedroll, the muzzle flashes bright, deafening. "Murderer, you'll hang for this!" A bullet whined past Clara's ear. Eli grabbed her, throwing her toward the horses, which were plunging against their tethers. "Go! Get on! Go!" he roared. He fired again, twice, at the remaining man, forcing him to take cover. Clara fumbled with the reins, her fingers numb. Useless. She clawed her way onto the mare's back. Eli ran for his gelding. He had his foot in the stirrup when the third man fired again. Eli grunted, a sharp, choked sound. He stumbled, his hand grabbing his leg. "Eli!" Clara screamed. He hauled himself into the saddle, his face white with pain. "Ride!" he yelled, slapping her horse's rump. They plunged into the darkness of the canyon, the third man's shots echoing behind them. "Ride! Clara, don't look back!" They rode for what felt like all night, Eli leading them on a path that was not a path, through scrub brush, over sharp rocks, up a dry riverbed. Clara just followed the dark shape of him, her body numb, her mind a blank scream. He was hit, he was bleeding. He led them deep into the woods, to a place she would never have found, a dark, hidden ravine. There, half fallen and covered in ancient vines, was a small, ruined shack, a hunter's blind. Maybe, from years ago. Eli slid from his horse. He did not land on his feet. He crumpled to the ground, his leg giving way. "Eli!" She was off her horse, stumbling to him. "Get inside!" he panted, his voice tight with pain. "Bar the door! Get the horses! Behind! Out of sight!" She did. She dragged him, her small frame straining, across the threshold. The place was tiny, full of dead leaves and the smell of rot. She barred the door, a piece of rotted wood. She ran back out, her heart in her throat, and pushed the horses into the thick brush behind the shack. Then she was back inside, in the pitch black, fumbling for a match, for the lantern he kept in his bag. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped the matches twice. Finally, a small, sputtering flame. She lit the lantern, and she saw the blood. His entire left leg, from the thigh down, was soaked. It was a dark, glistening black in the lantern light. He had bled. He had bled so much. He was pale, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She took his knife. She cut the trouser leg open, the thick, bloody canvas resisting. The wound was high on his thigh, a dark, ugly hole. It was still weeping blood, but slower now. She took the bandages from his pack. She took the whiskey flask he always carried. This is gonna hurt," she whispered to his unconscious face. She poured the raw spirit into the wound. Eli's body arched off the floor in a silent scream. His eyes flew open, unseeing, and he passed out again. She pressed the bandages, the clean cloth, against the hole, pushing with all her weight, trying to stop the bleeding. She wrapped it tight, her hands sticky and warm. And then she waited. The next 2 days were a living nightmare. He did not wake. He fell into a deep, raging fever. The wound, she could see when she changed the dressing, was swelling. It was an angry purple-red, hot to the touch. It was infected. She sat in the dark, cold shack, her rifle in her lap, listening. Listening for Harlan's man, listening for horses, every snap of a twig, every cry of a bird, made her heart stop. But she did not leave his side. She bathed his face with a rag dipped in their precious water. She forced drops from the canteen between his cracked, dry lips. She held his hand, a hand that was usually so strong, now lying limp in hers. "You can't," she whispered to him, her voice raw. "You can't die. You hear me? Eli, you don't get to save me and then die. I won't let you." On the third night, his breathing became shallow. It was a faint rasp in the darkness. His skin was on fire. She knew. She had seen this before. With her father. This was the end. She slipped from the floor to her knees. She bowed her head, her hair falling around her face. She had not prayed in years. God was a cruel, distant thing who lived in the judge's mouth, but she prayed now. She did not pray for forgiveness. She did not pray for her own soul. "Please," she whispered to the dirt floor. "Please, not him. He's a good man. He's all I have. Don't take him. Please, let him live." She wept, her tears dripping onto his still hand. In the deepest part of the night, he began to talk. He thrashed, his good leg kicking. No, Thomas, the water, it's too fast." Clara's head snapped up. She leaned closer. "My fault," he mumbled, his voice thick with fever. I wasn't watching. The river, so cold. Mama, I'm sorry. Thomas, I let go." He was crying, real tears tracking from his closed eyes. Clara listened, her own heart breaking. Thomas, a younger brother, a river. He wasn't dreaming of the war. He wasn't dreaming of the militia or the boy he'd seen hanged. He was dreaming of this. A child? A brother? She looked at this strong, violent, gentle man, a man who had killed 2 people to save her, and she saw the truth, the guilt he carried, the one that made him hide from the world. It was ancient. It was a wound he'd had since he was a boy, the man he'd watched die, the soldiers he'd deserted. That wasn't his sin. That was just more weight on a soul already convinced it was damned. She put her hand on his forehead. "It's all right, Eli," she whispered, stroking his hair. "I'm here." She realized, in that dark, cold shack, that she was holding on to the only other person in the world who understood. They were both carrying a death. They were both convinced they didn't deserve to live. And now, all she cared about was making sure he did. The fever broke like a prairie thunderstorm, fast and violent, leaving the air clean and cold. Eli woke in the pre-dawn hours, his skin slick with a sweat that was finally, blessedly cool. He was weak, his body hollowed out, but the fire in his blood was gone. Clara was asleep, sitting upright against the rotted wall of the shack, her rifle across her lap. Her face was gaunt in the gray light, etched with an exhaustion so deep it looked like a bruise. She had not slept, not really, in days. She had watched, and she had waited. He reached out a shaking hand, his fingers brushing her arm. Her eyes snapped open, in one fluid, desperate motion. She had the rifle up, cocked, and pointed at his chest before she even knew who he was. "Clara," he rasped, his voice a dry crackle. The rifle wavered. Her face, a mask of feral terror, crumpled. "Eli," she breathed. The rifle thudded to the dirt floor. She fell forward, her hands on his chest, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. "You're back," she whispered into his shirt. "You're back." He put his hand on her hair. He was too weak to do more. "I ain't going anywhere." They stayed in the hunter's shack for another week, until the last of the snows had melted from the high passes and the world turned from white and gray to a sudden, shocking green. The mountainside was awash in new growth, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. Spring had arrived. Eli's recovery was slow. The bullet had torn through the meat of his thigh, missing the bone, but the infection had nearly taken him. He was impatient, angry at his own weakness, but Clara was firm. She was no longer the skittish creature he had found by the river. She was the one who had held death back. She cleaned the wound, forced broth down his throat, and met his frustration with a quiet, unyielding steadiness. "You moved too soon. You'll open it up," she told him, her hands gentle but firm as she rewrapped the bandage. "And I don't have enough whiskey to save you a second time." He just watched her, his eyes dark, a new, profound respect in his gaze. The shack was too exposed. The third man, the one who had shot him, was still out there. They had to move. Eli marked a spot on his worn map, a place he had seen years ago, a hidden ravine, narrow and deep, with a spring running through it. It took them a full day to make the journey, only 2 miles as the crow flies. Eli was pale and shaking in the saddle, his teeth clenched, but he refused to let her see the full extent of his pain. The ravine was perfect. It was invisible from the trail, sheltered by a thick stand of aspen, the entrance choked with rockfall. Inside, it was a small, green, secret world. They spent the quiet weeks that followed building a new life. It was not a life of hope. Not yet. It was a life of pure, physical survival. And in that labor, their hearts began to mend alongside Eli's leg. He was still too weak for heavy work, so he sat and taught. He showed her how to build snares, his large, calloused hands guiding hers as she learned the intricate knots. "You gotta set it on a run," he'd murmur, his voice low. "Find where the rabbit's been, and put it right in their path." Clara, in turn, worked with a tireless energy. She found a flat, sunlit patch of earth near the spring, and with a sharpened piece of wood, she tilled the soil. She planted the few, precious seeds Eli had bought at the trading post: beans, squash, and corn. She was planting a garden. It was a fragile, defiant act of faith in a future she could not see. Together, they built a new shelter. It was little more than a lean-to, a frame of aspen saplings wedged against the stone wall of the ravine, the roof thatched with pine boughs. It was small, but it was theirs. It was not a place they had fled to. It was a place they had made. Their love, which had been born in the silent, trapped winter and forged in the desperate fire of the canyon. Now settled, it grew calmer. It was less a fire and more a steady, constant flame. It was in the quiet moments. It was in the way she would bring him a cup of water from the spring without his asking. It was in the way his eyes followed her as she moved about the camp, a look of quiet possession. They slept side by side on a bed of fresh, fragrant pine needles, his arm around her, his body a solid, warm presence in the night. The terror of the bounty, of Harlan, of the third man, was still there. It was a cold shadow just outside the ravine, a wolf circling in the dark, but in this small, hidden place, they held it at bay. One night, they sat by their small, smokeless fire. Eli was rubbing his thigh, a grimace of pain on his face. The wound was healing, but it was leaving a puckered, angry scar. Clara watched him. She thought of his other scars, the map of his life she had seen in the firelight. She moved to sit beside him, her knee brushing his. "It will always hurt," he said, his voice flat. "It'll be a reminder." "We have reminders," she said softly. She reached out, her fingers light, and traced the old, white scar on his side, the one from the militia, the one he had never fully explained. He flinched at her touch, not from pain, but from habit. She left her hand there, her palm flat against his skin. "We live with what we've done," she whispered, her voice a little stronger. "We live with the judge. We live with Harlan. We live with—" "Thomas!" His head snapped up, his eyes sharp, questioning. You spoke when the fever was bad," she explained, her voice gentle. "You spoke of your brother, of the river." Eli looked away, his jaw tight, a deep, ancient shame flooding his face. He said nothing. "It doesn't matter," she said, her fingers curling, gripping his shirt. "You live with it, Eli. You don't let it eat you." We live with what we've done, but we still live." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers, and in her gaze, he found not judgment, not pity, but acceptance. The same acceptance he had given her. He covered her hand with his own, his thumb rubbing the back of her wrist, right over the faded rope burns. He said nothing, but in the silence, a new, stronger bond was forged. They were not just lovers, they were witnesses. The outside world found them on a bright, warm day in late spring. Clara was checking the snares, her movements now practiced and sure. Eli was splitting wood, leaning on his good leg, the motion stiff but determined. The snap of a twig from the ravine's entrance made them both freeze. In an instant, they were a team. Eli grabbed his rifle. Clara grabbed hers. They moved to the rocks at the entrance, low and silent, 2 wolves defending their den. "Hello, the ravine?" a voice called. It was not a man's voice. It was cracked, old, and female. "I smell your smoke, and I got herbs to trade. If you ain't gonna shoot me for 'em." A figure appeared, picking her way through the rockfall. It was an older woman, her face a web of deep wrinkles, her hair a wild, gray mess under a man's hat. She was leading a mule, the poor creature laden with bulging burlap sacks that smelled of sage and lavender. "That's far enough," Eli called out, his voice hard, his rifle steady. The woman stopped. She squinted at them, her eyes sharp and bright, like a bird's. "Well now," she cackled. "Ain't you a jumpy pair? I'm Lottie. I sell herbs. I sell rumors, and I don't give a damn who you are, long as you got something to trade." She peered closer at Clara, who was half hidden behind Eli. Lottie's eyes narrowed. "Sakes alive," Lottie whispered, her playful tone gone. "I know you." Clara's blood went cold. "You're the girl," Lottie said, pointing a gnarled finger. "The one from Clifton Creek. The one Judge Thorne took in." Eli stepped in front of Clara. "You don't know anything. Old woman, move on." Lottie was not intimidated. She looked at Eli, at his rifle, at the way he favored his leg. She looked at Clara, at the trousers she wore, at the haunted, defiant look in her eyes. "Don't I?" Lottie said. "I know the judge is dead. I know Deputy Harlan is dead. And I know the third man, a loudmouth named Pike, rode back to town with a bullet in his arm and a story about how you—" She pointed at Clara. "And your wild man lover." She nodded at Eli. "Ambushed him." Clara felt the ground tilt. The third man, he'd made it back. They got a new marshal in Clifton Creek. Lottie continued, her voice low, conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Not a local man, one from up north, name of Shaw, and he's got a reputation. He ain't like Harlan. He don't mock, he don't bargain. He just hangs. He's a man known for vengeance, and he's mighty interested in finding you two." The air in the ravine was still. The only sound was the buzz of a fly. "Why are you telling us this?" Eli asked, his rifle not wavering. Lottie shrugged, her gaze softening. "Because I knew the judge, and I know a caged animal when I see one. You did the world a service, girl, but the world ain't gonna thank you for it." She hitched her mule's lead. "You're trapped here. You go east, Shaw will find you. You go south, the bounty hunters will. But," she pointed west, up the steep wall of the ravine, "there's an old trail, an outcast trail. Hard to find. It'll take you up over the peaks. Leads to a Mormon settlement, down in the Utah territory. They take in folks who got nowhere else to go. They don't ask questions. They just take you in." She looked from Clara to Eli. "You could be there in 3 days, be ghosts, disappear." "Why?" Clara whispered, her first word. "Why help us?" Lottie gave a dry, humorless smile. "The judge's wife. She bought herbs from me, for his stomach, but I knew what it was for. Laudanum. To sleep. She was as scared of that man as you were. You just had more courage." She pulled a small, cloth-wrapped bundle from her pack. "This'll be for your leg," she said to Eli. "Comfrey root. Make a paste. It'll pull the last of the poison out." She tossed it on the ground between them. "Good luck to you. Ghosts." She turned, her mule's bell tinkling softly, and picked her way back out of the ravine, leaving them alone with the choice. That night, the camp was filled with a new, terrible tension. The peace was shattered. The wolf was no longer circling. It was at the door. "She's right," Eli said, staring into the fire. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements sharp, angry. "We run. We take the trail," she said. "We go to Oregon. We stick to the plan. We can be packed and gone by dawn." He was right. It was the only logical choice. He was a deserter. He had killed 2 men, one a deputy. She was a wanted murderer. Running was all they had left. Clara was quiet. She was looking at the small, green shoots of her bean plants, pale and fragile in the firelight. She had put roots in this soil. She thought of a lifetime of running, fleeing her father's debts, fleeing the judge's cellar, fleeing Harlan's bounty, fleeing this new marshal's vengeance. She would be running forever. She would be looking over her shoulder every day for the rest of her life. Eli would, too. They would never be free. They would just be somewhere else. "No," she said. Eli stopped cleaning. "No, Clara, that marshal. He ain't Harlan. This ain't a game. He'll hunt us, and he'll find us. Let him," she said. She stood up, her body trembling, but her voice clear. "We run now. Eli, we run forever." She looked at him, her eyes pleading with him to understand. I won't be that girl anymore. The one who hides in cellars, the one who hides in the woods, the one who hides in ravines. If we run, we're just admitting we're guilty. We stay ghosts." "Clara, you are guilty," he said, his voice hard, but not cruel. "You killed him. I killed them. That's the truth of it." "It's a truth," she countered, her voice rising. "It's not the truth. I won't let them. I won't let him make me a ghost." The debate was over. He saw the new, hard certainty in her face. This was not the broken woman he had saved. This was the woman who had saved him. She was done running. He stood up, his leg aching, his heart full. He knew what she was asking. It was insane. It was suicide. They would ride into a town that wanted to hang her, to a marshal who wanted them both dead. He looked at her, at the fierce, fragile hope in her eyes. He thought of his brother, Thomas. He had spent his whole life running from that guilt. He had hidden in the militia, in Silas Croft's ranch. In this high, lonely country, he had been a ghost. Just as she said. He stepped toward her. He put his hands on her face, his thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. "Then let's stop running," he said. They did not ride west. They rode east. They rode out of the ravine the next morning, leaving the shelter, the garden, the snares, all of it. They rode down from the high country, onto the open, muddy prairie. They rode toward Clifton Creek. For the first time, they rode in the open, in the broad daylight, not as fugitives, but as travelers. As they neared the town, a knot of pure, cold terror tightened in Clara's stomach. She wanted to turn, to run, to go back to the ravine. She felt Eli's hand find hers. He reached across the small space between their horses, and he took her hand. He laced his fingers through hers, his grip strong, absolute. They rode into Clifton Creek, holding hands in public. A public declaration. We are together. We are here. The town was just as she remembered it. The wide, muddy street, the false-fronted buildings, the smell of coal smoke and manure. People stopped. They stared. A man at the smithy dropped his hammer. The clang loud in the sudden silence. A woman outside the mercantile gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's her," someone whispered. "It's the Thorn girl, the murderer." The whispers grew. "And that's him. That's the one who killed Harlan." A crowd began to gather. Not hostile, not yet, but hungry. They followed them. A growing wave of murmuring. Shocked faces. A man stepped out of the saloon, blocking their path. He was a large man, the owner, his apron stained. "That's far enough, you two? We're here to see the marshal," Eli said, his voice calm, his hand still holding Clara's. His other hand was resting on his thigh, near his pistol. "You're here to hang. The man sneered. "She killed the judge, robbed him." Clara's head snapped up. "What?" "Everyone knows," a woman shouted from the boardwalk. "The widow, Mrs. Thorne. She told everyone how you murdered the judge in his sleep and stole his strongbox. You're a thief and a killer." The lie was devastating. It was clean. It was simple. It sealed her fate. The crowd was closing in, their faces turning from curious to angry. This was not a trial. This was a mob. "She's lying," Clara cried, her voice high, desperate. "The widow! She's lying!" "And why should we believe you?" the saloon keeper shouted. Clara looked at the faces, the hard faces of the men, the cold, judgmental faces of the women. They had already convicted her. She was the outsider, the debtor's girl, the filth. She looked at Eli. He was watching her, his face grim, but his hand was steady in hers. He was not going to save her. He was going to let her. She took a breath. She let go of his hand. She stood up in her stirrups, her legs shaking, but her voice, when it came, was clear. It cut through the murmuring. "Because I didn't kill him for money," she said. The crowd went silent. "I killed him," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "Because he kept me chained to a post in his basement." A collective, shocked gasp. "I was sold," she continued, the words raw, tearing from her. "At a debtor's auction. Judge Thorne, he bought me, and he told the town he had taken me in. But he was a monster." She told them everything. The cellar, the ropes, the belt, the storm. She told them the truth, the whole, ugly, brutal truth. She spoke to the stunned gathering, her words painting a picture of the man they all thought they knew. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, stunned silence. They stared at her, this wild-looking woman in men's clothes, her face pale, her eyes burning. They looked from her to the judge's fine, white house on the hill. For the first time, someone believed her. It was a woman near the back, an older woman with hands raw from lye soap. Clara had seen her once, doing the judge's laundry. The woman's face was pale. The cellar," she whispered, just loud enough to be heard. "His wife, she never let me go down there. She always said it was flooded." Then another voice. "A man. I saw him at the auction. I saw her. He did buy her." The silence broke. It shattered into a dozen murmurs, a dozen questions, a dozen fragments of doubt. The narrative, the widow's clean, simple lie, had just cracked wide open. The scattered, murmuring crowd in the muddy street was a powder keg. Clara's confession, raw and brutal, hung in the air, a challenge to every person in town who had called the judge a good man. They were stunned, uncertain, their anger now confused. A man stepped through the stunned townsfolk. He was tall, his coat long, his face weathered and cold. He did not look like Harlan. He was not wearing a tin badge. He wore a polished one. This was Marshal Shaw. He had been watching from his office, and he had heard every word. He stopped in front of the horses, his gaze moving from Clara's pale, defiant face to Eli's, whose hand was resting on his thigh. A silent, deadly promise. "Miss Clara," the marshal said, his voice as flat as the prairie, "you have, in front of half the town, just confessed to the killing of Judge Elias Thorne." "Marshal," Eli said, his voice a low growl, "you heard the rest of it. It wasn't murder." "I heard an accusation," Shaw said, his cold eyes not leaving Clara. "And I heard a confession. It is not my job to be a jury. It is my job to make an arrest." He stepped toward Clara's horse. "You'll come with me." "No," Eli said. His hand moved. "Eli, don't!" Clara's voice was sharp. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. No more killing. I'll go." She had come here to stop running. This was the price. Marshal Shaw looked at Eli. "And you, sir, I have a report from a man named Pike. Says you and this woman ambushed him and Deputy Harlan. Says you killed Harlan." Harlan had her tied to a tree in a freezing wind, Eli said, his voice shaking with a quiet, lethal rage. He was going to let her die. They fired first. I fired back. Another story for the judge, Shaw said, unimpressed. You're both under arrest. For murder. Wait. A voice, sharp and female, cut through the tension. It was the laundry woman, the one who had spoken up. She pushed her way to the front, her face pale but her eyes angry. Marshal, she's telling the truth about the judge. He weren't right. He was a monster, another woman shouted. This one from the boardwalk, the farmer's wife. He threatened my husband's loan. He said he'd see us starve if I didn't. She broke off, sobbing, her face buried in her hands. The crowd erupted. It was not a lynch mob for Clara. It was an explosion of pent-up fear and rage, all directed at the White House on the hill. She deserves a trial, the farmer's wife screamed. We all deserve to be heard. Marshal Shaw looked at the crowd. He looked at the hard, angry faces of the women, the shame-faced, muttering men. He was a smart man. He knew a riot when he saw one. Hanging this girl now would tear the town apart. Fine, he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the noise. There will be a trial. A proper one. He looked at Clara. But she will wait in my jail. He grabbed the bridle of her horse and led her toward the small brick building. He looked back at Eli. You stay in town. You set one foot outside of Clifton Creek. And I'll know she was lying, and I'll send a wire for a hanging judge. She'll be on the gallows in a week. Am I clear? He was using Eli as a tether. Eli just nodded, his face granite. Clear. He watched them take her. He watched the heavy door of the jail close. And then he just sat. He dismounted, tied his horse, and sat on the bench opposite the marshal's office, his rifle across his knees. And he waited. The cell was cold. It was stone, and it smelled of old sweat and despair. Clara sat on the narrow cot, her bravado gone, replaced by a deep, numbing cold. She had told the truth, and the truth had put her in a cage. Eli came every day. The town learned to walk around him. He was a silent, grim statue. He used the fur money to buy her a thick wool blanket from the mercantile. He paid the saloon keeper for 2 hot meals a day, and he brought them to her himself. He would stand at the bars, the tin plate of stew and bread in his hands. You're eatin', he would command, his voice low. I'm not hungry. Eat, Clara. You gotta be strong. On the 3rd day, she was fading. The cold and the fear were eating at her. They all look at me like I'm a snake, she whispered, her hands gripping the bars that separated them. They're not looking at you, he said, his voice softer. They're looking at themselves, at what they let happen. You showed them their own fear. They don't like it. He was her anchor, the only solid thing in a world that was tilting. Eli, she said one evening, the sun setting, the cell growing dark. The trial, it's a formality. They'll hang me. I killed a judge. You ain't gonna hang, he growled, his hand gripping the bar so tightly his knuckles were white. If I do, she said, her voice small, a child's voice. If I hang, I want you to be there. I don't want to be alone. Not again. Please. He closed his eyes. He rested his forehead against the cold iron. He couldn't speak. He just nodded. A single, sharp, painful movement. The trial became a public event. The story had spread. The girl who killed the judge. The dead deputy. The hidden life of a powerful man. A traveling circuit judge was brought in. A thin, stern man named Harris. The town hall was packed to the rafters. People stood in the street, craning their necks to listen through the open windows. Eli stood in the back, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. It began. The prosecutor, a slick man from Cheyenne, painted Clara as a serpent, a cold-blooded, ungrateful killer. Then he called Elsbeth Thorne, the widow. She was a vision in black silk, her face pale, a lace handkerchief pressed to her lips. She told her story. How Clara was a troubled, difficult girl. How she, Elsbeth, had tried to be kind, and how, one night, she had woken to find her husband dead, the house ransacked, and the strongbox, containing over $500, gone. The crowd murmured. It was a clean, damning story. Then, Clara's lawyer, a young, nervous man assigned by the court, began to call his own witnesses. He called the laundry woman. She testified, her voice shaking, that she had seen the chains. In the woodshed, Your Honor, I thought they was for a dog. He called the farmer's wife. She told her story, her face burning with shame, of the judge's private meetings, of his threats to ruin her family. He called the man from the auction. He testified that Judge Thorne had, in fact, purchased Clara for the sum of $30, witness after witness. A picture began to emerge. The courtroom was splitting. The good people of the town, the banker, the mercantile owner, they muttered, calling the stories filth and lies. But the other half, the farmers, the ranchers, the wives, they sat in dead, cold silence, their faces grim. The judge's secret life was being laid bare, piece by ugly piece. Then they called Clara. She walked to the stand, her steps small, unsteady. She sat, her hands clasped so tightly they were bloodless. The prosecutor was brutal. Did you, or did you not, take a belt and strangle Judge Elias Thorne? Yes, she whispered. Speak up, girl. Yes, she said, louder. And you fled in the night, like a thief? I ran. I was afraid. Afraid of being caught. After you had taken his $500? There was no money, she cried, the lie infuriating her. I took nothing. She looked out at the sea of faces, the judging eyes, the curious eyes, the angry eyes. She felt the cellar walls closing in. She broke. She put her head in her hands, and she sobbed. A raw, ugly sound that filled the room. The prosecutor smiled. He had her. She wept. He had me chained. He was, she told them. Not as a plea, not as an excuse, but as a last, desperate confession. She told them about the cellar, about the cold, the darkness. She told them about the storm, about the sound of his laugh, about the feel of the belt in her hands, about the feel of his life ending. The courtroom was so quiet. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a hammer blow. When she was done, she was empty. She had nothing left. The prosecutor, seeing his victory, moved in, his voice slick and condescending. So, you admit it. You did all this. You took the life of a respected man, a man of the law, all just to escape? Clara slowly lifted her head. Her face was a ruin, blotched and wet with tears. She looked past him, through the crowd, her eyes finding the one steady presence in the back of the room. Eli. He was watching her. He did not look away. His gaze was a lifeline. She took a breath. She turned her eyes to the prosecutor, to the jury, to the judge. Her voice was not a whisper. It was clear. It was final. No, she said. I didn't kill him to escape. I killed him to be free. The jury was out for less than an hour. The town hall was silent, the air thick with dread and anticipation. They filed back in. The foreman, a grizzled old rancher, stood up. He did not look at Clara. The judge spoke. On the charge of murder, in the first degree, how do you find? The foreman cleared his throat. Not guilty. A gasp. We find, the foreman continued, his voice louder, that the act was one of self-defense. The room exploded. A roar went up from half the crowd. The women were weeping, hugging each other. The farmers were stamping their feet. The other half, the judge's friends, rose, their face purple with rage. Shame, one man shouted. This is no justice. Clara just sat, frozen. The words, not guilty, they were just sounds. They didn't make sense. She was free. The marshal uncuffed her. You're free to go, miss. She walked, unsteady, down from the platform. She walked, in a daze, out of the town hall. The crowd parted for her, people cheering, people scowling. She stepped out into the bright, sharp sunlight. She blinked, and he was there, at the bottom of the steps, just as he had been at the jail. He had not moved. He was just waiting. His face was not smiling. It was full of 1,000 things she could not read. She took the last step, and the strength that had held her up for 3 days, for a lifetime. It just went. Her legs buckled. He caught her. He didn't just catch her, he lifted her, in one fluid motion. He scooped her off her feet, his strong arms pulling her against his chest, her face buried in the rough wool of his shirt. Right there, in front of the whole town. He held her, and she sobbed. She cried out all the fear, all the pain, all the years of the cellar, all the ice of the canyon. He just held her, his eyes closed, his face pressed into her hair. He whispered, his voice for her alone. "You're free now, Clara," he breathed. "You're free, not because of the law, because you told the truth." He carried her to the horses. Marshal Shaw was there, leaning against a post. He nodded at Eli. "My report will say that Deputy Harlan and his associate were killed in the line of duty, while attempting to apprehend a violent fugitive. You, sir, are a hero for stopping them. Self-defense. Seems to be a lot of that going around." Eli just looked at him. "Marshal." He put Clara on her horse. He mounted his, and together, they rode out of Clifton Creek. They didn't look back. They rode back into the mountains, back to the high, hidden ravine. They did not run. They stayed. The lean-to became a cabin, a real one. Eli, his leg healed strong, felled the trees, the sharp thwack of his axe a good, solid sound in the valley. Clara, her hands growing calloused and strong, chinked the logs, mixing the mud and straw. They worked in the quiet, easy rhythm of two people who know each other's movements. The small, pale shoots in her garden, the ones she had planted as a desperate act of hope, had grown. They planted more. They built a better home, a stronger fence. They were burying the past, not by forgetting it, but by building a life on top of it. They buried it under the fresh-cut floorboards, under the dark, turned soil of the garden. The cabin was finished. The summer was high and warm, the days long and golden, the nights clear and cool. They lay on a blanket outside. The fire burned down to a bed of glowing, red coals. Above them, the sky was a vast velvet sheet, so full of stars it looked as if it had been torn open. It was quiet, the deep, peaceful quiet of the high country, the sound of the wind in the pines, the soft call of an owl. Clara lay on her back, her head pillowed on his chest. He was stroking her hair, his touch no longer healing, just loving. She was quiet for a long time. She looked at his face in the starlight, the hard, broken nose, the scar through his eyebrow, the mouth that had whispered he had never stopped. "Eli," she whispered. He murmured, his voice a sleepy, contented rumble. She turned her head, looking up at him. She saw his strength. She saw his guilt. She saw the man who had sat outside her jail cell. "Do you still want me?" His eyes opened. He looked down at her. He didn't seem to understand how, after all this, after the trial, after the building, after the peace, how could she ask that? He saw the tiny, lingering shadow of the cellar in her eyes, the last little piece of the judge. He smiled, a small, slow smile that was just for her. "I never stopped," he said. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, craving kiss of the old cabin. It was not the tender, healing kiss of the ravine. It was a kiss of promise. It was the kiss of a man who was home. He lifted her, his arms strong, and carried her from the starlight into the warm, dark cabin they had built. He laid her on the bed, a real bed, on a mattress stuffed with fresh, sweet pine. The moonlight, clear and bright, streamed through the new, small window, painting their bodies in silver. It was slow. It was tender. His hands, rough and scarred, traced the faded rope burns on her wrists. Her hands, calloused from the axe in the garden, traced the long, puckered scar on his thigh. They were two scarred bodies, two scarred souls, but they were not broken. They were mended. They were whole. They made love in the warmth of their new home, not for escape, not for comfort, but for life. They were two people, finally, who were choosing to live. Thank you for listening to this story. We'd love to know where you're listening from, so please, leave a comment. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West so you don't miss any of our tales. And let us know your thoughts on Clara and Eli's journey in English.